Once every generation or so, someone arises who redefines the boundaries of human creativity and achievement, leaving a permanent mark on art, culture, and history. These rare individuals transcend their own time, and their work ends up speaking across centuries while inspiring both awe and admiration in the hearts of anyone who lays eyes on it. It's hard to envision someone who so completely captures the imagination of mankind, like the subject of today's video. A figure whose unparalleled genius gave us some of the most unforgettable masterpieces that the world has ever seen. And as fate would have it, at the turn of the 16th century, Renaissance Italy was blessed with not one, but two of these extraordinary talents. But unfortunately, we'll have to save Leonardo da Vinci for another day. Today, we're focused on the man who sculpted kings from marble, painted the creation of man on the Sistine Chapel, and envisioned architecture that reached towards the heavens. His work not only defined the Renaissance, but forever altered what it meant to be an artist, proving that human potential and creativity knows no bounds. So sit back, relax, and grab yourself a cup of tea, as today we take a look at the life of Michelangelo Buonarroti. Michelangelo was born on the 6th of March 1475 in a small town called Caprese, located in the Tuscan countryside. Although his birthplace was fairly humble, his family did have noble roots, but it's not really something to get excited about, as by the time Michelangelo was born, their status was definitely waning. Shortly after he was born, his father, Ludovico, decided to move the family to Florence, a city which lay firmly at the heart of the Italian Renaissance, which was in full swing by the time Michelangelo got there. The world was changing, and Italian society was now being driven by the rediscovery of classical art and scientific ideas, and somewhat conveniently, Michelangelo found himself right in the middle of it. He showed exceptional talent from an early age, spending his time drawing and copying paintings instead of playing games, and naturally this set him apart from the rest of his peers. Although his natural talent was self-evident, his father was initially resistant to the idea of allowing Michelangelo to pursue a career in art. Being an artist at the time was seen as a manual trade, and he deemed it an unworthy profession for someone of their supposed noble lineage. But despite his initial hesitancy, young Michelangelo's gift shone through and he finally gave in. So at the age of just 13, Michelangelo became an apprentice to one of Florence's most respected painters, an artist named Domenico Ghirlandaio. To most people, working for someone so prestigious would likely be somewhat daunting, but not for Michelangelo. His artistic skill and dedication was in a league of its own, and in Ghirlandaio's workshop, he mastered everything from painting frescoes and mixing pigments to detailed composition and human anatomy. Yet it was clear that his true passion lay in sculpting. His ability was so great that after 1 year, Ghirlandaio put him forward for a unique opportunity: admission to the garden school of Lorenzo de' Medici. Lorenzo was one of the most influential figures of the Renaissance. Italy at the time, instead of being a unified country, was made up of several independent city-states, with Florence being one of the most powerful. Lorenzo himself ruled what was known as the Republic of Florence from 1469 until his death in 1492, although during this time he never held an official title like prince. Instead, his power came from his role as a de facto ruler and from his family's immense wealth, which was largely derived from their banking legacy. This time was pivotal in young Michelangelo's life. Under the patronage of the Medici family, he was exposed to many things, such as classical art and philosophy, and ended up being mentored by some of Florence's leading intellectuals. Michelangelo began to absorb these influences, and his work started to reflect both ancient Greek and Roman art, with an emerging focus on realism, anatomy, and the human form as a whole. We begin to see works emerging such as the Bacchus and the Battle of the Centaurs, to name just a couple, which were used to showcase his remarkable ability to capture movement and emotion in marble, the latter being even more remarkable when you realise the man who created it was just 17 at the time. It was whilst under Lorenzo that his notoriety started to increase, as it was becoming increasingly clear that Michelangelo was more than just an ordinary artist. He took his work much further than most and was obsessed with studying the human body. In fact, he was so fiercely dedicated to his craft that he took it upon himself to source and dissect cadavers, which at the time was a taboo subject and would land you in a lot of trouble. Therefore, he may have done this under the cover of darkness in order not to arouse too much suspicion from the legal or religious authorities of the day. Although he was able to get hold of bodies from local hospitals, it's rumoured that he would occasionally pay a visit to one of the local graveyards. That being said, it must have paid off in some way, shape or form, as his anatomical knowledge was second to none, and he was able to give the world some of the most famous statues ever carved from stone, including the Pieta and David, which he finished when he was 24 and 26 respectively. The Pieta is the image of the Virgin Mary, holding the body of Jesus shortly after his crucifixion, and remains one of his most iconic works. It's still considered a masterpiece to this day, and has inspired numerous artists, not just because of its technical complexity, in which Michelangelo was not only able to perfectly render both the folds in linen and the sorrowful expression on Mary's face, but also capture the spiritual significance in the lifeless body of Jesus being held by his mother. Ideally, it might be worth taking a moment to pause the video and really look at the complexity and depth of the statue, whilst at the same time remembering it was carved by hand out of a single block of marble. The statue of David was no less remarkable, and after being commissioned by Florence's cathedral, Michelangelo set about turning a previously discarded block of marble into yet another masterpiece. Interestingly, he chose to portray David differently to many contemporaries of the day. At the time, David was usually depicted after his fight with Goliath, often flaunting his victory by either lifting up the head of the recently slain giant or resting his foot on it. Michelangelo, however, made an artistic decision to fashion David moments before his fight with Goliath. And so when you look at the statue, you'll see a David that is poised and staring off into the distance, with his piercing eyes fixed on the approaching Goliath, contemplating the magnitude of what he was about to undertake. Ultimately, the statue never made it into the cathedral, but ended up in the centre of the city, where it became a powerful emblem of Florence's strength. If you are lucky enough to visit Florence today, you'll find that the original statue is now held in the Accademia Gallery, but a replica still stands in its place. So, after you've created such masterpieces, the question becomes, where do you go from here? And the answer in Michelangelo's case seems only to be upwards. In 1508, he was asked by the Pope at the time, Julius II, to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was initially reluctant to do so, mainly because he considered himself a sculptor and not a painter. But he ended up conceding, as during that era, the Pope wasn't really someone that you were able to say no to. And so, with some reluctance and despite there being a tense relationship between Michelangelo and the Pope, he set to work, painting the 9 Old Testament scenes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, alongside the various biblical prophets and other characters, which as it turned out was a lot easier said than done. He effectively had to construct a large wooden scaffold and spend the majority of his day lying on his back in a confined space with his arms in the air. He was also famously protective of his work, not allowing anyone to see it until it was finished. Once it was finally unveiled after 4 years, you'd have never imagined that the man who painted it rarely painted frescoes. In total, it contained over 300 human characters, alongside numerous other intricate architectural and design elements. The work as a whole depicts the story of creation and humanity's relationship with God, which remains a defining moment in the history of Western art still to this day. Every year, thousands of people flock to Vatican City in order to lay their eyes on the now 500-year-old masterpiece. The Sistine Chapel ceiling wasn't the only work he did for the Vatican. Before he was commissioned to paint the ceiling, he was asked to design the Pope's tomb. And in true Michelangelo style, his initial ideas were grandiose, and the tomb itself was supposed to contain over 40 statues. In the end, after suffering many delays, due mainly to funding and shifting priorities, the entire project was scaled down and not even finished until about 1545. Michelangelo himself described it as the tragedy of my life. That being said, despite the strained relationship that he had with the Vatican, the tomb contains yet another statue, which is considered also to be a masterpiece. This time, a statue of Moses. When looking at the statue, you don't just notice the intricacy of his hair, but also that Moses has a pair of horns, and despite the various theories, it's largely believed to be due to a translation error in the Latin Bible when describing Moses coming down from Mount Sinai. It's easy to talk about the works of Michelangelo for hours due to just how many there were and just how magnificent they were. As a result, it's easy to conflate the artist with the art and forget that there was more to the man than just his work. Naturally, he was a fierce perfectionist and riddled with self-doubt. He often kept to himself, was socially isolated, and as can be ascertained by many of his works, was a deeply religious man. Due to the demanding nature of his work, he struggled with various health problems into his later years. As you can imagine, spending 4 years lying on your back painting a ceiling could be pretty grueling. The political situation of the day must have also taken its toll on him, as he lived through both the fall of the Florentine Republic and also the sacking of Rome in 1527, as well as the Counter-Reformation in Europe. But what seemed to trouble Michelangelo was his preoccupation with his own mortality and salvation. And as he grew older, his works began to reflect this more and more. That being said, he was able to channel many of his personal struggles into his work, and produce paintings such as The Last Judgment, a true reflection on the mortality of man and the themes of both salvation and damnation. And despite his growing older, he kept working well into his later years on major commissions such as the design of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, in which he modelled the dome after that of the Pantheon, which later came to symbolise the ingenuity of the Renaissance. Michelangelo himself lived to be 88, which was a long life for the time, but his art and legacy lived on far beyond the span of his natural life. His influence can be seen everywhere, from his art to his architecture, and during his lifetime he became more than just an artist, and has gone down in history as a symbol of human achievement. It really puts things in perspective when you see all of these great works emanate from the life of just a single man. But I think now is about time that we bring this one to a close. I hope you enjoyed the overview of one of history's most remarkable people, and please remember to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now.